pray thee purge me of this curse, I do repent of my sins. I pray thee purge me of this curse, I do repent of my sins. I pray thee purge me.
It's a young girl!
Hold the horses!
Make way. Clear a space. Does she live?
Barely, Highness.
She is Heike. I can feel it. Child, what is your name?
Her name was Aurélie Paquet, a peasant girl from Normandy who is to become a significant presence in the court of Empress Matilda. Welcome to the Clash of the Cousins podcast.
Ooh, I like what you did there.
Ah, thank you, Tessa, thank you. Well, I always like to start with something a little bit dramatic. It adds flavour. So, my dear listeners, today we will be discussing Aurélie's life and her journey to accepting her Heikathic powers. With me is Professor Tessa Golding, an expert on medieval society and lifestyles, known to millions of young people through her popular posts on social media. Tessa, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm very happy to be here. And I hope we'll be hearing more of those fantastic dramatizations.
Oh, well, we certainly will. We most certainly will.
There's such a great way of making history engaging and exciting for a young audience.
Quite. Well, let's just get stuck in now, shall we? So, the means by which Aurélie came to be part of Maud's retinue is hazy. But we do know they met in France, and we do know Aurélie was reluctant to use her Heikathic powers at first.
Let me die. Let me be released from the curse.
My surgeon has done what he can, but your wounds will leave many scars. Why did you not heal yourself?
I will not fall into evil.
Evil? Hecate's legions! Did your mother teach you nothing, child?
She taught me to fear the witch's curse, to purge myself that it might not take hold, to turn to God and trust in His mercies.
Your mother has done you a woeful wrong.
She saw the evil grow in me, but we were powerless to stop it. I thought if I could fly far enough,
Perhaps if I taught you how to use your gifts.
Witchcraft! To light a candle without flame.
I call it useful. Give me your hand. Tell me what you feel.
I feel lighter. How?
I have stimulated your body to release your common senses.
You would control me.
I would free you, child. Let me teach you what your mother would not. Let me show you what it means to be a Heike.
So, Tessa, this is a very tumultuous period, with Stephen's grab for the crown already underway and famine ravaging the land in England.
Yes, the burning of crops in East Anglia, which you touched on before when discussing Alice Eymor, that caused food shortages across much of central and southeast England in the following years. Of course, in rural France, where Aurélie was living before she met Maud, they didn't have these troubles. And so her life there was fairly idyllic.
Well, it would have been hard work, of course, not forgetting.
Oh, yes, of course, backbreaking in many ways. Though we know little of her life pre-Maud, it is likely that her family were farmers in some kind, and so she would have been expected to work from a very young age. This is before the era of childhood as we understand it today, and children were as much workers as the adults. But it would have been a peaceful life. A good life.
Yes, I suppose that is one way of looking at it, at least until her Heikathic powers emerged. Aurélie revealed later in life that her mother had been a foundling, raised by the Catholic Church. So when her Heikathic powers manifested...
Oh, but that means that Aurélie's mother must have had some contact with her own mother at this point, right? The power can't transfer without physical connection.
Oh, absolutely right, absolutely. And since Aurélie's mother insisted they never met, the most logical hypothesis, and the one to which most historians subscribe, is that Aurélie's grandmother remained close to her daughter, perhaps even being someone she knew and trusted in the village. And then it would only take a small point of contact for her to be able to transfer the power. Something as little as taking her daughter's hand would suffice.
but as I understand it, the transfer of Hycathic power causes a considerable and very visible reaction in the blood. I mean, the veins light up throughout the body. Not something she was likely to miss.
No, quite. That's absolutely true, which is why we assume the transfer happened whilst Aurélie's mother was sleeping. By the time she woke up, it was all over.
That does seem logical.
Exactly, and Aurélie relates how terrifying it was for her mother when the powers manifested. I believe her first experience was healing herself after a burn from the kitchen fire. This was witnessed, unfortunately, by the other kitchen staff, and of course, for superstitious Catholics, it was witchcraft.
Well, technically they were right.
Yes. Yes, I suppose they were. But it had a very different meaning for them, of course. Aurélie tells us that her mother was cast out soon after and hid her powers as best she could, praying they would not affect her daughter, which, of course, was impossible.
And ever likely, poor Aurélie was just terrified. Ignorance like that of any kind is so damaging.
Yes. And so now Maud took Aurélie on as her maid. But this would have been very unusual for the time.
Oh, very much so. A lady's maid in those days was not a servant as we understand it today. She would have been more of a
lady in waiting.
Yes. A woman of noble birth who formed part of the Empress's court. It was a high-status position, so for Maud to appoint a peasant girl from Normandy would have been quite the scandal. If it wasn't for Aurélie's Hycathic abilities, it simply would not have happened.
We sailed for England in late July. My mistress was most insistent that I remain in her rooms rather than stay below with the other servants, which caused yet more suspicion amongst them. I was more greatly disturbed by the waves, however, which seemed like to tip us over every moment. Though we had stayed 3 days in Le Havre for clement weather, and the sailors thought conditions calm, I was glad to be again upon the land, and though I miss my home, I think I never shall again risk the waters to reach it.
Now, England was still under Norman rule in the mid-12th century, but still, it must have seemed a strange place to Aurélie.
Oh, yes, yes, indeed. Maud understood what it was to be removed from everything familiar, and she did not forget Aurélie's family. She wrote to her parents, reassuring them that their daughter was safe and inviting them to visit her.
And the letter survives. That's just fantastic.
Oh, it's extraordinary. We've been fortunate enough to have some great archivists over the centuries. We really have.
Though you have striven to turn her against her true nature, you must know that Aurélie is a Hycatha and deserves to develop her abilities in safety. I am therefore taking her with me to England, where she will serve as my maid. Here, she will have the life you have denied her, and I hope she will prosper. You are, of course, welcome to visit her, should you wish to, but I expect you to leave your Catholic superstitions behind in France. This messenger carries a purse, which should compensate you for any inconvenience Aurélie's absence may cause to your work, and provide funds for you to visit her, if you so choose. I wish you peace and good fortune, Empress Matilda.
It was a nice gesture on Maud's part, but of course at this time the majority of people couldn't read.
True, but not forgetting she did at least write to them in French, so they would have been able to take the letter to someone who could read it for them. And we know from Aurélie's later writings that this indeed happened, as she was able to keep in contact with her family.
Phew, that's a relief. It would have been awful if they thought she'd just disappeared.
Oh, of course. But we do know that Aurélie found life in the castle extremely hard, and it must have been a huge adjustment for her.
Oh, absolutely. She's gone from the freedom of wide open fields to what is effectively a stone cage. Plus, on top of her training, Aurélie was expected to perform her duties as a maid. And although she will have been used to hard work on the farm, castle life will have been much harder for her.
And of course Maud wasted no time in beginning her training, though Aurélie was not the best student.
Mistress, Why do you insist that I must learn the ways of the devil? You say I can be powerful if I practice these arts, but what merit power if it is born of sin?
You must put aside the superstitions of your mother. Your abilities are natural. In your religion, do you not believe that all things come from your God?
Oui.
And that your God is perfect and can do no wrong?
Oui.
Well then, if you believe your God gave you these powers, it is your duty to use them as they are intended, is it not? Answer me, girl.
I suppose.
So we'll have no more objections. There is a war coming. We will need all our powers if we are to claim victory.
Are my abilities truly sent by God? My mama believed they were the devil's work, but if it is true that God made all things, then how can this also be true? These matters are beyond me. I don't care about a foolish war. I just want to go home. Every day I beg my mistress to return me to France, but she will not hear of it.
From her diaries, we can tell that Aurélie was desperately unhappy under Maud's tutelage.
Yes, but she was also a teenager. Granted, there wasn't the teenage lifestyle as we understand it today, but the mental and physical changes that accompany this time of life would have been present. And to me, her responses at this point have all the signs of the archetypal sulky teen.
Quite so, which really does beg the question why Maud persisted in her training. After all, she had many other Heikathai at her command. The fact that she didn't give up on Aurélie suggests she saw her as more than just another Heikatha. Almost as a symbol, perhaps. Rescuing Aurélie from Catholicism and superstition became symbolic for her plans for the liberation of her whole queendom, or kingdom as it was then, of course, once she had conquered Stephen.
And isn't this around the time that he laid siege to the castle at Arundel?
It is indeed. Although not yet at war, Stephen saw Maud as a perpetual threat, and laying siege to the castle was his way of offsetting that threat. Now, Professor Tessa, perhaps you could give our listeners an idea of what life was like in a castle under siege.
Oh, awful, basically. That's the short version.
Yes.
I mean, imagine it. You have an army camped outside, constantly bombarding you with rocks, diseased animals, severed heads of the poor messengers you sent out to negotiate with them. They might be tunneling under your walls to make them collapse, or wheeling up siege towers to climb over the walls. You may have a secret way out of the castle, but they're dangerous to use, so it's hard to get supplies and you've got to survive on what you have. Of course, the longer it goes on, the worse it gets, with food and water becoming scarce, sickness running rife through the crowded spaces, fear and desperation as starvation grows worse. There are even documented cases of people eating shoe leather, horses, cats and dogs, even each other, just to survive.
Oh, it was utterly brutal, terrible.
And you know what? It's expensive. Armies need to be fed and paid, and while soldiers would often be promised plunder from the besieged castle in payment, well, a siege could drag on for months, and with soldiers often only on 40-day retainers, they might just up and leave. So it was in everyone's best interest to try and strike some kind of deal as early as possible to get it over and done with.
Indeed, and this was for the most part the way things went ahead, but the siege at Arundel was one that dragged on, to the extent that it became a point of contention between Maud and her stepmother, Adeliza, whose castle it was, of course. Adeliza had offered Maud Arundel as a base, but neither had anticipated Stephen's actions.
There are reports they may breach the outer wall.
My men have their orders. All is under control.
Under whose control? It seems to me the usurper has the upper hand. Should we not strike back?
You were a great support and comfort to my father and kind to me. I'm grateful for that. But you are no military strategist, stepmother. Trust me when I tell you, all is in hand.
Remember whose castle it is you risk.
And remember whose wishes I fight to honour. By my father's will and by my birthright, this throne is mine. and I will risk any number of castles to regain it.
Despite her bravado, Maud knew that she had to take decisive action to break the siege, and intended to use her Heikathic powers to do so. She was also pushing Aurélie to use her magic, and it seems that Aurélie was now responsive to her training for the first time. Whether this was due to fear of the besieging army, fear of Maud herself, or perhaps just time and curiosity, Aurélie seems to have been boosted out of her teenage sulk and into a more receptive mindset.
It is hard to concentrate with such intrusion.
Block them out, child. You must clear your mind and focus your energies. You are coming into your powers now and have made progress, but there is still much to do.
I can bend a spoon at a touch and light a candle without flame. These are small things.
Small, yes, but not useless.
I have made peace with this demon, that is true, and I bring light to the darkness. But I am still afraid the power will overmaster me.
You enjoy the feeling.
I do.
Hold on to that, child. It is with this power that we shall break the usurper's hold and take back our rightful inheritance.
I do not see how the lighting of candles can break the siege.
From small things, greatness grows. If we could only leave this castle, get close to their camp, we two combined could set them all ablaze.
No! That is wicked. I will not use this power to harm others.
They are the enemy. You have seen their brutality. The remains of our brave messengers hurled over our walls. They revel in death, so we shall bring death to them.
They are the loyal soldiers of their king. They do no more than their duty.
Their duty is to me as their lawful queen. My father named me his heir, and 'tis treason to deny the word of the king. We will show them how we punish such offenders.
The suggestion from her diaries is that Aurélie was genuinely terrified of Maud at this point, and the lengths to which she was prepared to go. In fact, she wrote about this very encounter.
My mistress seemed as mad. She spoke of burning the besieging army, and it seemed the earth fire in that very room glowed brighter with her words. Still, I was fearful she may set us all aflame. I remembered how she had calmed me when we first met, by taking my hand and seemingly speaking through my body. So now I bethought me to try the same for her. I took her hand, seeming to join with her in her plans, and focused on a calming thought, as she had shown me. And my mistress did indeed seem to calm, at first. But I think I may have gone astray, for soon she fell to weeping most alarmingly, never stopping for a full hour, then fell into so deep a sleep, I feared she may be dead.
Aurélie could not have killed Maud with her magic, of course, in a million years. But a Heikatha cannot control the way their subject will respond, and Maud's reactions would have been alarming to an inexperienced teenager. However, her vigil seems to have given Aurélie time to come up with a plan to prevent Maud from burning the besiegers. She wrote, in fact, in her diary that she had formulated an idea which could conquer the siege, Stephen, and the war all in one.
But this idea wasn't recorded, I take it.
Oh no, unfortunately not.
Yes, this is a common problem with documents from this era. Records are frequently lost due to conflict, fires, thefts, not to mention the floods of 1921, or just plain human and Heikath error.
Yes, most unlike Stephen, who was not known for his mercy or ability to compromise. And there are many theories as to why this happened. For example, Robert of Gloucester, Maud's half-brother, was at that time causing significant problems in the southwest, and with Arundel Castle proving impregnable, it could be that Stephen simply did not want to tie up his armies with a siege many miles away. Or he perhaps saw Gloucester as a larger threat than Maud.
You have to remember they were still living in a patriarchal society, where women's status was little more than the property of their fathers or husbands. I mean, regarded as incapable of complex thought, the idea that a woman might be a skilled leader and a strategist never occurred to them.
Ironically, it's just that kind of misogynistic thinking that got them into this succession crisis in the first place.
Exactly! But of course, it does work both ways, and many have speculated that it was simple chivalry that led to Stephen's actions. He was known to be generous and courteous around women, so it would fit that he simply let her go.
It's certainly a possibility, and it is the theory most favoured by anti-High Catholic historians, but it does ignore many of the eyewitness accounts.
Yes, they usually dismissed as superstition, of which there was a lot around this period. But if we view them through a High Catholic lens...
Exactly. There are so many accounts, directly written and anecdotal, which mention Stephen's very strange behaviour at this time.
The king did speak distractedly.
He rent his garments, tore his hair. I fear, my lord, the king raves.
He speaks of strange rituals and bloodletting. Could it be he is mad?
'Twas as though I looked into a mirror or a still pool, yet none was near.
Sire, you must rest.
How can I rest when such forces are at work?
He speaks in riddles, repeating often, "She is me." Naught else but this. What can it mean?
This must not be known abroad. We cannot weather another assault upon the throne. The king must be brought to his right mind.
Now, the accounts are very specific on his ravings, as they called them, his repetition of "she is me," and talk of bloodletting suggests perhaps Maud had shape-shifted into Stephen.
Yeah, that would have been a bold move, but we do know that Maud and Stephen met at this point, so it would have been fairly simple for her to take his blood.
Could be, but ask yourself this. Could it have been Aurélie's big idea? To make Stephen believe Maud could rule as him? If this is what happened, it was an extraordinary gamble. At that level of High Catholic magic can only be sustained for a short time, but Maud knew it was unlikely Stephen would be aware of this. Whatever the truth of it, the fact is, in 1139 the siege ended, and Maud was allowed to escape from the castle. At which point she headed straight for Gloucester and her half-brother Robert, where she set up court.
We have been in Gloucester now almost a month, and I confess it is a relief to be amongst friends again, but my mistress has many visitors. I do not fully understand her talk, but I believe that she is gathering more of us Heike together. It feels strange to refer to myself as such, but after the past weeks and the events at Arundel, I feel I can now describe myself no other way. I no longer believe my powers to be the devil's work. And I've written to Maman to reassure her that she should not worry for me.
Another tantalizing hint there of what Aurélie's big idea was.
Yes. And it's interesting that she has made peace with her High Catholic nature. There are several accounts of the activities at Gloucester, and many reference Aurélie's increased involvement with Maud's plans, especially during her meetings with Alice Eymor and Roosmarijn Doolard, whom she had tasked with recruiting High Cathai to her cause.
Both of whom were successful, I understand.
Oh, yes. Alice recruited several High Cathai, but it was Roosmarijn who brought back the real prize.
I have never seen an Iridia before.
Most have not, child. They are very few.
I also brought more than 100 other Heiketai, ma'am, Synthai and Bethlai, all of whom gladly heeded your call. And do not forget my efforts.
Our numbers were much depleted during the siege. We must work swiftly.
It is not only about war. If we wish to establish the High Catholic faith across England, we must recruit more souls to the cause.
And I'm sure you will.
I thought we only looked to retake the throne.
I must regain my rightful inheritance, yes. But I also wish to bring the High Catholic faith to its rightful place at the centre of life in my realm. And with these Neridii, we have a mighty weapon for the cause.
Mistress, if we use our powers to win this war, will not the people be afeard of the new queen?
All who love me will have no need of fear. They will understand this. Come, sisters, talk to me of your homelands.
It seems she treats our hardships lightly, concerned only for the glory your Neridier may bring. Perhaps I should remind her that one of the central pillars of our faith is respect. If we hope to build a true High-Catholic realm, we cannot begin with one of our pillars laid low.
Another is resilience, is it not?
It is.
Then practice this, and understand that my mistress has much to manage, that we cannot conceive. Faith should be its own reward.
The Empress has taught you well, and I see much of her strength in you.
Thank you, my lady.
No need for titles. I am no higher born than you are. Come, let us all three talk of our travels. I am sure there is much we can learn from each other.
Aurélie's relationship with Roosmarijn is what's really interesting about this period in her life. Perhaps in some way, trying to compensate for the child she left behind, Roosmarijn seems to have taken Aurélie under her wing. And although Aurélie continued her studies with Maud, increasingly it was Roosmarijn she went to for guidance.
Her diary mentions this a lot. It's really fascinating reading.
I mean, Aurélie was still a teenager when the war ended. But this didn't stop Maud giving her the Duchy of Hastings, one of many titles she gave out to reward those who had remained loyal to her.
Although, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Aurélie turned down the duchy at first.
She did, but this was more through homesickness than fear. By the end of the war, Aurélie was a very different person from that terrified girl fleeing through the forest. She was intelligent, loyal, trustworthy, and no yes-woman. She spoke her mind with stark honesty, often clashing with Maud and others on matters of policy. But these, you see, are the qualities Maud looked for in a duchess. She needed to know her lands were governed well. However, Aurélie never lost that yearning for home, planning to return to France and her family after the war. She was only persuaded to stay when Maud offered to bring her family to her. She wrote in her diary, in fact, of her joy at the reunion.
My beloved parents have arrived and brought with them a new baby brother. I had not heard from them for so long, and this was a joyous surprise to see. They have named him Frederick, and I'm sure he will grow to greatness in his new home. Mama still worries for my soul, but she's reconciled with my nature and understands it comes from her ancestors. She will not permit magic to be done around her, however, so all do refrain in her presence. They are not yet well accustomed to the new lives. Papa insists upon working in the fields, to the consternation of the villagers. They cannot permit the father of a duchess to assist in manual work. Yet, he cannot sit idly by while they toil. I'm sure, in time, we shall find some happy compromise. For now, I'm just glad to live and prosper with them near.
What a lovely way to finish.
Oh, yes, it's so touching. I thought so too. So touching. And so, though her family was now with her, Maud remained a constant presence, her lifelong mentor, in fact. And Aurélie did much to settle the rebellious north for her, creating stability in the region. She also kept strong links with Roosmarijn, even making her godmother to her first child, and always valued her guidance. In the end, Aurélie grew to become one of the most powerful and respected synthai of her age.
So, basically what you're saying is, she lived happily ever after?
Yes, pretty much, yes. And on that note, let's leave our examination of Aurélie Paquet, the peasant girl who became a duchess. It just remains to thank dear Professor Tessa Golding for joining me today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, likewise. And thank you so much for listening, dear listeners. Don't forget to share and subscribe to this podcast and join us again next time when we will be discussing the infamous Lucy Bolingbroke.
Oh, I'm definitely tuning in for that one. She is one of my absolute favourites.
Oh, mine too, Tessa. Mine too. So, till next time all, bye for now.